Hello and welcome to another episode of Answers on a Podcast Please, the podcast where we get to know more about the Wesley congregation. My name is Ben and each week I'll be joined by different guests to share stories and memories and have a little bit of fun. For the second episode of Season 2, my guests are Jenny Dowding and Judy Davies, who, after serving as Methodist ministers for many years, settled at Wesley as congregation members. So hello Jenny and hello Judy, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, Ben. Lovely to see you.
And you, I hope you've been making the most of the lovely weather we've had today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's dive straight in. I'd like to start at the very beginning, if I may, and hear a little bit about where you're both from and what life was like growing up. So let's start with you, Judy.
Okay. Well, I was born and brought up in Swansea in South Wales. All my family are Welsh, so that's very definitely sort of where I'm from. Mm-hmm. I think Wales will always, in a very real sense, feel like home, although it's unlikely I'll ever live there again. But it's one of those things when I drive over the Severn Bridge and I see Croeso Gymru, I feel as if I'm, coming home. So I was brought up in a Christian home. My father was Plymouth Brethren and my mother was Anglican, Church in Wales. So we ended up going to a Methodist church as a sort of what felt like a happy medium.
Yeah.
And so, and I've an elder sister, and it was a happy family. So that was my growing up. Yeah.
Fantastic, and we will explore a little bit more about that as we go on. Jenny, how about you?
Well, I was born on the day the NHS started. And my mum had her hospital fees refunded. So I was a very considerate baby. Yeah. I grew up in Hove, next door to Brighton. And I lived there until I was 20 with my parents, my younger brother. It was not a church-going home, but it was a very happy home. And I went to various Sunday schools at different times. And when I was 20, I went to West College in Birmingham to train as a youth worker, and my first job was in Bournemouth, where I ended up living for more than 30 years until coming into ordained ministry. I tend to think of Bournemouth as home, really.
Right, because you were there for such a long time.
Yeah. I've got no family in Brighton and Hove now.
And as I mentioned at the start that you both served as ministers in the Methodist Church, what were your respective journeys into ministry and where did you serve and how did it all develop? Judy?
It's a long story because I've been a minister for a very long time.
That's all right.
I sort of came into ministry after I graduated. I did a first degree in English literature, and then after that, I knew I wanted to work with people, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I found myself working in a hostel for homeless women and their children in the East End of London. And this was a hostel under the auspices of the Methodist Church. So I was around sort of 22, 23 at that time. And it was while I was there that a couple of people, independently of one another, asked me whether I'd ever thought about going into the ministry. And I hadn't, actually. I wasn't even a local preacher. But I found that once the question had been asked, it just sort of niggled at me. And wouldn't go away. So I explored it and decided to apply for ministry, and I did everything back to front as a Methodist because I thought I applied to be a minister. Candidated, we say in Methodism, of course. I candidated for the ministry, and then had to become a local preacher because I hadn't done that first. So yeah. It was all completely back to front. The Methodist Church sort of bent a little bit for me, and I was accepted as a candidate. And then I frantically went around doing my local preacher's exams and getting my practice as a local preacher after I'd candidated. But this is not the normal way of doing it.
No. Where were you based when you were doing your training for the ministry?
I was in Cambridge at Wesley House. So I had 3 very happy years there. Really enjoyed it.
And then were you sort of countrywide in your various posts?
Not really. When I left theological college, I went back to South Wales, and I was stationed in a very large circuit called the Mid Glamorgan Mission, which was in the South Welsh valleys, north of Cardiff, what are now ex-mining valleys because all the pits have closed. And I spent very formative years of my ministry in the village of Aberfan. Anybody of my generation will know the name because it was the site of that terrible disaster in 1966 when a slag heap fell on a school and 116 children and 28 adults died. And so it was a very significant place to live. I found as a minister, it was a real privilege. And I was also there during the 80s, so during the miners' strike. And the whole church got very involved during that time, sort of supporting miners and their families. That felt important too. Yeah. So I was there for 8 years. And then I actually moved to Reading in 1988. And I went without appointment for a while I had 2 small children. And then I started doing a bit of hospital chaplaincy. And that completely changed everything for me because I started working in healthcare chaplaincy, particularly in palliative care. And as soon as I started doing that, I thought this is actually where I'm meant to be. Okay. And so, in fact, I stayed in palliative care and as a healthcare chaplain for the rest of my ministry. So I didn't move around. No. In the same way that that a lot of ministers in more traditional church appointments do. So.
But you found your calling.
I found my calling. Yes, I really did. Yeah.
Lovely, Jenny. How does your story compare?
Oh, not at all. I became a Christian when I was 16 at a circuit youth event in Brighton. And I joined the Methodist Youth Club because my best friend at school was a Methodist and she was always going on about how wonderful this youth club was. So I joined it. And as a result, I had this experience of encountering Jesus in a very kind of close way. And up till then, I was incredibly shy. I still am, actually, a lot of the time. But discovering and understanding how much God loved me gave me some new confidence. And so within a couple of years, I was exploring a call to be a local preacher, which I did then become a local preacher for many, many years. I was a local preacher for far more years than I've been a minister. And then I went, as I said before, to college in Birmingham to train as a youth worker. My first job was in Bournemouth. And then I got married and had children. And later on went into community work of various kinds. And from time to time, people would say to me, have you thought about the ordained ministry? And I was 100% certain that it was not for me. And then one day, I can only describe it as a still small voice. I can't explain it, sort of questioning it. And I thought, I've imagined it. So I did what you shouldn't do, and I gave God a test. I said, if it's you speaking to me, then prompt somebody else to say something to me today. Well, nobody did. So that was a great relief. But the next day, I was out having lunch with an American woman minister I'd got to know. And we went for a walk. And in the course of it, quite unexpectedly, she said, have you thought about the ministry? And of course, my jaw dropped. And she picked up on that. And I had a whole list of excuses and reasons why it wasn't right. And she had an answer for them all, except for the last one, which was I couldn't ask my husband at that point of his life and our lives to uproot. And she said, well, have you asked him? So I asked him, and he's told me later he was very, very shocked. But he was a very generous man. He said, if it's the thing you have to do, you have to do it. And as a result, a few days later, I sensed God again, and went to see my superintendent in Bournemouth, who was the Reverend David Ellis, formerly minister at Wesley. And then I went through the training at STETS, which was an ecumenical distance course based in Salisbury, and various members of staff at different times had also trained there. And then as I came towards just before a year before I was due to finish, I was asked to consider filling a sudden gap that had arisen in the Salisbury circuit, and to be part-time in the circuit while I finished my training, and then full-time. And it worked really well because Bernard, my husband, was by then dealing with a lot of health problems, and because I was going to be based not far from Bournemouth, I was based in Fordingbridge near the New Forest. It meant he could continue with the healthcare that he was having, and so we moved to Fordingbridge, and I had pastoral charge of 6 little chapels, which was quite a shock.
Yes.
And I mean, then I was there for 7 years, during which time, sadly, Bernard died. And then I felt it was right to move on after a lot of heart searching. And that's when I came to Reading as the minister at Caversham Heights and Gosbrook Road.
There's a good connection between the two churches. I know that, in fact, Brenda and I that was our church before.
Yeah.
2 churches ago, we were at Caversham. You both then, after your various posts in Reading, settled at Wesley. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, Wesley became a really important place that I could come to as a member of a congregation, because one of the things about working full-time as a chaplain, I was then working in the Royal Berks and also at Duchess of Kent Hospice, is that I was always working on a Sunday. And it meant that in the hospital, you never had, as it were, a church community. You had different people who would come to services. Maybe sometimes nobody would come at all, but you had different people most weeks, in different stages of ill health, and sometimes, a couple of members of staff as well. So I really felt the lack of a church community that I could just feel sort of gently a part of, without, if you understand this, without it making any demands on me, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And one of the lovely things about Wesley was that I was able to sort of dot in and out without ever feeling that, why don't we see more of you or anything like that. Yeah. I always felt very welcome and felt part of the congregation there. And I particularly valued the early communion, the once a month early communion, because I used to come out of work and go to that, and sometimes actually lead that service. And then I would go back to work again afterwards. And then after I retired, it was a sort of natural place to go. So yeah. That's how it worked for me.
And Jenny?
Well, when I arrived at Caversham, I was expecting to do 5 years, then retire and go back to Bournemouth. But I started to feel I didn't really want to retire, so it kept on getting extended. But I finally realised I was running out of energy, and I retired, or sat down, as we say in Methodism, in 2019. And I had expected to go back to Bournemouth, where my children both are. But the more I sort of thought about it, the more I thought I didn't really want to. Well, there were reasons I did want to, but there were other things that I was going to miss about Reading. And after a lot of humming and hawing and talking to wise people, I decided to stay in Reading. But I needed to be very sensitive to the fact that I was still not far from where I'd been minister. So I've been very clear that I stay away from Caversham to be fair to my successor. So I even before I looked for a house, I decided where I wanted to worship. And I think what I was drawn to in Wesley was it's such a diverse congregation in terms of age and nationality and everything else. And that reflects one of the things I really value about Reading, is the diversity of the town. And Wesley seemed to sort of reflect that. So I'd hoped to find a house somewhere near Wesley Church. That didn't work out. But I'd already set my heart on worshipping there. And it feels a bit weird because, of course, I was only there a few months before the first lockdown. So I've spent more time in retirement, not at Wesley in a physical sense. So I'm looking forward to when I can really begin to feel like part of the church. I mean, everybody's been very welcoming. I don't want to suggest they haven't, but it takes a while.
Of course, I have to say, I didn't realise that you'd been here for such a short time.
Oh, thank you.
It feels like you've been here much longer. I know that everyone's sense of time is currently warped because of everything going on. I didn't realise it was only 2019.
Yeah, September 2019, yeah.
Great. And Judy, you've actually just left Reading and moved west.
I have, yes.
Only a matter of weeks ago.
Yes, just a few weeks ago, I moved to Salisbury. I retired in 2018, and it was a sort of, combination of sort of, yes, it was the right time for me. And also I had some health issues. So for one reason or another, it felt a good time, the right time to, as it were, stop. I was quite open, really, about what I might do when I retired. But I think I had a sort of growing sense that it was going to be like a new chapter for me. And as part of that, turning the page and beginning a new chapter, I felt that I should move. And I thought for a while about different places. I did think about going back to Wales, but my younger son lives in Salisbury, so I've been visiting him on and off quite regularly over the last few years. It seemed to tick so many boxes for me. It's such a beautiful place. It's a proper city with a proper sense of itself and a lot going on. But it's also very compact. Everything is within walking distance, which is wonderful for me. And so I decided I would take the plunge and move. And a house came up. And of course, it was in the middle of lockdown, but I thought it felt right to just go for it. And so I did. So I moved, it's exactly 6 weeks ago now. So it's still very early days.
Of course.
But I do feel as if I'm really settling in. It feels like a good move. And I'm enjoying sort of exploring, finding my way around. And so that's where I am now.
As difficult as it is, the one of the joys about all of this is that you're able to worship online with different places. So there's of course, I know you're still tuning into Wesley, perhaps while you're not actually physically able to go to another church to discover one.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it's one of the strange but rather wonderful thing about all these sort of Zoom congregations and YouTube, etc., is that you can keep connected with places that you've actually left.
Yeah.
So I've sort of tuned into Wesley, quite regularly. The Methodist Church here in Salisbury has been, I've had a couple of phone calls from people, and everybody's been very welcoming. But I have to be honest and say that as a worshipping experience, because Wesley puts everything on YouTube so that you can actually follow the service through, rather than it be a sort of live stream Zoom service, which is what the one in Salisbury is, I find that a much more satisfying experience. It's wonderful to have the Wesley choir singing. So yeah, I've certainly kept my links with Wesley. I've started sort of trying to get to know Salisbury Methodist a bit. And I've also been to the cathedral a couple of times because it started having worship again. It's such a wonderful building in which to worship. It's just glorious.
Well, I think we should end with some quick fire questions, as ever. So we'll start with Jenny. So, Jenny, tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Favourite holiday destination?
Iona.
Oh, stop it. You're making me very jealous.
I'm supposed to be going there this August, all being well, but who knows?
I'll have my fingers crossed for you.
Thank you.
Favourite season?
Summer.
Your favourite book of the Bible and why?
If you ask me now and then ask me tomorrow, you'll get different answers. Today, I would say the Gospel of Luke, because Luke seems to have a much more sensitive awareness of the poor, of women, of marginalised groups.
Yeah, lovely. And what is your favourite hymn?
Oh my, I can't possibly say. Well, today I would probably say The Servant King, because it encapsulates so much enormous truth, but it also leads us into what it means to follow Jesus. So if you ask me half an hour's time, I'll say something else.
Judy, TV or book?
Right, TV or book? Book.
Yeah. Favourite roast dinner?
Chicken.
Sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
Favourite Bible figure and why?
Am I allowed to say Jesus?
He's a figure in the Bible, by all means, yes.
Because, I mean, Jesus is at the centre of my life, and I just think that he's amazing. So it's just...
That's fine. I mean, yes, it seems funny that we would rule out Jesus as being a Bible figure when we are, by all means. And what's your favourite hymn?
Like Jenny, I have different hymns which will, speak to me at different times. At the moment, and I think it's partly influenced by this glorious weather, I really love All Creatures of Our God and King for a number of reasons. I love the sort of creation emphasis of it. Musically, I love the way it goes into a harmony when you get into the Alleluia. I love that. And it's also all encompassing. I love the fact that it has a verse towards the end, which is about kind and gentle death. And so it feels like the whole of life is there. So that's my favourite at the moment.
Excellent. I think with the words of that lovely hymn ringing in our ears, that's a perfect place to end. So thank you, Jenny and Judy, for joining me today and sharing your stories with the listeners. It's just been lovely to have a bit of a chat, really, a bit of a natter.
Well, thank you, Ben. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
It's been lovely to see you, Judy.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. We bring people together on this. That's the joy of it. And thank you to you at home for listening. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future episodes. You'll also find all previous episodes of Answers on a Podcast Please on our YouTube channel. You can keep up to date with all the goings on at Wesley via our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram pages by searching Wesley Methodist Church Reading or by visiting www.wesleychurchreading.org, and hope you'll join us again next week.